Can you hear that?
The speakers are pointing that way.
All right, okay. I'll come down then. I was going to ask you, your information requirements there are excellent. Do you find a reluctance on your design team to comply because they're effectively taking on the liability of takeoff?
Well, I'd argue that it's not the liability of takeoff, it's the production of information. The liability still sits with us. Is that working, yeah? I would say that the liability of accuracy on quantities and accuracy on cost is still with the QS. The information they're producing, but the processing of the information is on the QS side. That's why I would say that it's very important that the quantity surveyor gets their requirements into the contract, because at the end of the day, it stops with them. All you're doing is using the information produced by others, but you have to qualify that information to make sure that it's accurate for you to use.
Okay, anybody else?
Hi, great presentations, guys. Question for Ryan. I suppose clients have an expectation now that buildings will be managed beyond the handover stage. It's not just build it, hand it over. It's now build it, hand it over, operate it. And they want that level of quality of information, energy efficiency, the whole lot. They want that to work beyond the finish date. How do you address that? How does Scottish Futures?
Yeah, well, on the schools programme, it's quite interesting how the finance for that's working. The schools are all, I guess the capital costs are all, have to be funded up front by each local authority. And then in the operational phase, there's a payback to that local authority from central government. And there's certain conditions linked to that, and it means that that building has to be kept at a certain quality or a certain condition in order for them to get that full equal rebate back. We're sort of moving away from that sort of PPP model as well, where you might have a contractor or whatever carrying through post handover to manage it as well, and they keep the reins in terms of the O&M information, so it's moving away from that as well and putting the onus back onto the client to do that reporting and ensuring that the quality and the safety of that building is kept on their side. I think that's just a general shift in industry at the moment. Post Grenfell or whatever golden thread you want to talk about. There will be more of an onus. I think our view is that the ability for clients to offset their risk on the safety and quality of their buildings is getting less now. You can't just put it on the operator. The buck will stop with them, so they need to be asking for that information up front and to be able to access that as well. It's one of the big issues that we see is clients don't have access to an accurate asset register. They don't have access to record information. It might be kept all within the confines of the operator. So it's breaking that apart and giving that transparency and accuracy in the operational phase as well. So that's how we see the shift moving, which is in the right direction. I think, does that answer your question?
I'd like to add something to that. When you have a model, a BIM model, a good BIM model, all that information in that should not be distinguishable from the information that's in your CDE. It should be, in theory, the same thing. And from having a very good BIM model, what you should be able to do is create a feedback loop connected to an IoT or the IoT of Things system. So you're getting the feedback from the heating system, from the electrical bills, from everything. Everything should be there and that model should be live for the client. It shouldn't be locked away somewhere. That should be giving you data back month in, month out, telling you that your asset is actually running as designed. Because nobody knows when it stops running as designed. It's like, it's only when you get the bills or when it breaks down or where it fails. And this is just so old world.
Hi, Owen McManus, Dublin City Council. The whole BIM word is becoming more to the forefront in Ireland and certainly in Dublin City Council with the announcement that OGP wanted to be mandatory now for all projects and rolling that out over the next 5 years. And in Dublin City, I've been responsible for rolling out an asset management system maybe 5 or 6 years ago for transportation-related assets. So the first thing I'd like to know is BIM useful for transportation-related assets? Because instead of buildings would be one comment. But also, with an existing asset management system, at what point in time in the BIM process does that need to feed in? Does it need to feed in right at the outset, or is that something that you deal with a little bit later on in terms of as-built drawings, etc.? I'm just trying to understand that concept, because there's a lot of people talking about it in Dublin City Council, and like myself, I don't fully understand the process, but I've got this existing system that needs to be maintained. Is it going to be wiped out by a BIM and replaced, or do the two interoperably feed into each other in some way at the outset or later on? I suppose just trying to understand that a bit better.
Just on your first point about BIM for transport or infrastructure, I mean, absolutely. You'll find, designers now who are, and contractors also, who are delivering infrastructure are using digital by default on 3D. So it's data rich, it's all there, I guess. And also at that sort of scale as well, it's probably, I think on the field for maintenance purposes and so forth, it'd be a lot easier to be able to get access to that and interact with, quite specific assets, on our motorway or whatever. So it's all there for the take, and it goes back to that. What data do you need? What information do you need? And specifying it at the start on the existing buildings, but also the existing asset management front. I think your question was like, will BIM sort of override that? On what stage should information be fed into it? My own view would be certainly on new builds. As I said earlier, the asset delivery process. What we've done with the information management plan is align that to the delivery process. So your asset data is coming out and checked and verified as the design evolves through the completion. It's only at that last bit, the last 10, 15%, it should be updated to reflect the as-built. But if the supply chain and the installers are all tuned in, contractually obliged to deliver the commissioning test information, and so which ultimately can go up into your CAFM, you should be able to receive that information sequentially, not in one go, and the digital O&M builds accordingly, or updates accordingly. The challenge for us that we are seeing is keeping it up to date, is getting, I don't know what it's like within Dublin Council, but most local authorities in Scotland, they just don't have the resources or the skill sets to keep digital, or not even digital, but O&M information up to date. They have 3 or 4 people driving around in vans, managing 30 buildings. It's all in their head. It goes back to the note earlier. They're maybe in their 50s, late 60s. They're going to walk away with all that knowledge and as well. So it's trying to make it easy for them to update something. Like your existing CAFM, you don't have to. Last point would be about that consistency of handover, having that structured handover approach. So the information needs to be delivered in this way. It doesn't matter what the front end is, whatever CAFM you use. If you can align the back end, your whole supply chain, particularly on the schools program, all the contractors now, all the suppliers, designers are now delivering in that way. So they're getting consistency right across the piece. So.
We do a lot of our work in Denmark, and the Dublin Metro is about to start, I hope. But the Danish Metro has been delivered in BIM. The previous 2 phases are, and the new phase are. And it becomes a very important part of the delivery model, I would say, in terms of quality control and everything. So absolutely, infrastructure should be taken into digital design and building information modeling or management. But to support, I guess, what you're saying, in terms of when do we take over as Dublin City Council, when we take over the information, it's at the back end of the construction for sure, but your requirements and your needs, that needs to be put in the front end, as we mentioned, get those into the contracts. And I think your presentation has been great in identifying that in terms of what you guys have done over, and perhaps Dublin City Council need to begin to look at this if you guys haven't already, of course.
I'd just like to add one thing to that is, we talk about the model, the BIM information modeling, and the CDE. And perhaps Ryan said earlier in his talk that, the information's there. It's always there at the beginning, and it just gets lost on the journey. So it's more about how do we stop losing it, because it's all there. It needs to be there at the beginning to do it. So how come we don't have it at the end? Or how come it's all just so difficult to get a hold of? And so the way that I see the future of this going is when you have a BIM model, you shouldn't have CDs. Everyone's got a CD, right? You can have 3 CDs on a project. Now you've got an uncommon data environment. You need to stop that. And I would also say that perhaps each asset, each building, should have its own CD. That's it. That's the CD for that building, for that asset information. And you have a record of when that information went in, when it changed, who changed it, how it was changed, and what is the final data. So the two should never be separate. They need to be considered mentally as the same thing. CDE is a non-graphic version of the graphic model. You know, they're the same thing, just in 2 different formats. And that would really solve that problem.
Hiya, Aidan Cullinane, HSE, Kaplan Estates. Ryan, just going back to your previous point there with the gentleman from Dublin, from the Dublin City Council, we're currently in the middle of rolling out this the National Estates Information System across the country for the HSE, and you're looking at over 4,000 buildings, 80 large acute hospitals, etc. So from an order of magnitude, it's huge. And I think just referencing your point about gathering existing asset data and inputting the data, and then the next steps in relation to BIM and transporting the data in, what we're finding is the biggest challenge is actually change management and culture shift. So like technology is years of code and algorithms and things like that, but it's the will of actually from operations, maintenance, facilities, FM, and having the quality of the data available is a huge gap. Like you referenced earlier about life critical systems and critical systems. So we would align to standards legal, the HTMs here, like yourselves. But it's actually getting the information. And it's easy once you get it to input it, but getting it in and managing it is a big challenge. And we're working out at the moment on a BIM strategy and how we get the information through BIM, and how we use that information moving forward and stuff as well. So it's quite a challenge, yeah.
Yeah, no, just agree on that. I think going back just to what I presented on around that grading approach, we find that really effective to be able to. I think as an industry we've got to a point now where, as you said, technology exists. Technology can do what we want. So it's now how are we going to get the benefits out of it? How are we going to leverage it? There's some amazing stuff going on, in digital twin space and so forth. But ultimately, it can do anything. But what do you want it to do? And that's where the clients need to weigh in. And our role is to support them to understand what they need and ask for it, and then get industry to calibrate themselves to do it in the way that's of most value to both the operators, but also even the occupiers as well, and so forth. So the grading approach has been really effective. But equally applied to an existing building where you can look at existing assets, grade them, and at the starting point where you can start to zone in what do we need for those critical assets and how do we structure the delivery of those. And then you can sort of grow that exponentially right across an estate, but also across lower grades.
It's one of the biggest challenge for multi-asset owners like yourselves. 4,000 units, you said there. Like, that's an impossibility if you try to think about it. You need to bite off small little chunks and eat slowly, I would say, over the next couple of decades to get there. Because if you try to do it 4,000 units in one go, it'll fail. It's impossible, And I think that's, for clients, the idea of BIM, it's challenging for them in that sense because it is so vast and large and new. But if we take little wins, like the cost stuff, for example, for us, it's a little win for the client that we can move on to the next stage and develop over time with them,
Hiya. Sonny McNulty here from JJ Ratkins. My question's for Ryan. Can you hear me? Yeah. I suppose we're involved in building lots of schools, and we're seeing information requirements creep in, and I suppose it's probably a learning curve there in terms of defining those information requirements. But I suppose one thing we're seeing is that once the information is being handed over, it's dropping off in terms of who's responsible for managing it and updating it. In Scotland and on the projects you're working on, you've outlined a couple of different scenarios there of who, the local authorities, or if there was a FM company involved. I suppose, is there any scenario where I suppose most of the schools in Ireland, for where we're involved in, we see it seem that it's the caretaker and the principal that are responsible for. We're giving them this Ferrari, and they can't even drive the VW they have. Like, you know, we give them O&Ms on USB keys and projects gone by, and you know, they're in the drawer, and the next time there's a problem 2 years down the road, we get the call, we come back to the office, and the USB is still in the drawer, you know. So I suppose what I'm wondering is, is there any, are the schools in Scotland, is there FM companies set up to manage those assets, or is it the local authorities and councils that have people set up to manage them, or is there all three scenarios?
Yeah, it's a mix. And what you just described there about the Johnny being the custodian owner of the O&M information, it just resonates. You know, a lot of the investments going into the capital phase to build these new schools, to replace aging, you know, public sector buildings essentially. Local authorities have got reduced budgets in operational, you know, departments, and yeah, it goes back to that sort of note earlier about firefighting. And yeah, a Johnny doesn't need a. I mean, I totally understand about the BIM model, and I really like. I think we could catch up with you later because there's some really good value and efficiencies and almost in the lightweight way you're delivering that. And I could see a janitor, if he could access that information within 2 to 3 clicks, would be really valuable to them.
You can do it no clicks.
No clicks. Okay.
No clicks. I mean, what you were saying earlier is just I use my finger. When you design. We have to care about the buildings that we finish, and trust me, the janitor or whoever's looking after the building, if he's got to go through 12 manuals and cross-check and cross-reference, that's difficult. That's really difficult. If he's got to click on a light and it tells him what the light bulb is, that's really easy. I've been in situations where the companies that we work for, they want the 12 manuals, and the guy who looks after it wants the model. Because it's so easy, because you have to design it so it doesn't take a lot of training. So it's instinctive. It should be press on it, point at it, press on it, get the information. That is, you know, we live in a new technological era. It moves very quickly, it's very sophisticated, and it's very easy. Part of its sophistication is that if you have to explain it to somebody, it's not working. You know, it works like that, you know, and it demonstratively works like that. It's not over the hills and far away. It's here right now, and it's been here for a while if people specify it. Yeah, and that's the key. Specify, ask for it.
Just a quick follow-up. What scenario would you say works best in the, you know, caretaker, an FM company, or a local authority?
Yeah. Pardon?
Just depends on.
Yeah. I mean, each local authority have got their own different approach. Some of them do it in-house fully. Some of them just manage the statutory compliance stuff and outsource the management of that. We're moving away more from a DBFM to more of that sort of ownership, control being led from each local authority. But yeah, I'd love to see all local authorities in Scotland be able to use something as you presented earlier, and that is the future state. I guess having to deal with the public sector at that sort of level, industry level, right across where there's so many variants, we are probably taking it at a smaller pace to try and bring industry along with us. And first most is about getting standard data in place and getting that underway. So yeah.
Thank you.
One more question before we let you go and get some lunch.
Hi, I'm Mary Flynn from Dublin City Council. My question actually is for Ross as a fellow QS. You're mentioning we're taking out the data out of the models, and we couldn't obviously handle all of the models. So I'm just wondering, did you have a QS model view definition to get just the data we want, how we want it?
No.
So that
actually, we're using the design definition, so we're mapping to their definition rather than having a double coding structure and requirements. It complicates the workflow for everybody. So if you're moving from project to project, different projects have different requirements. It's great if you have a repeat client or your repeat design team. Then you can standardize, especially for the schools, for example. You can standardize that workflow and you can really automate it. But for projects where the design team changes and all of that stuff, we're not doing that because it just complicates the workflow. So what we're doing is we're taking the unique class, or in Denmark it's a different standard, and we're mapping that to ICMS, for example. We're not embedding ICMS in the models. We don't work in Revit. We don't have Revit licenses. We're not designers. We work in IFC only. So, and I think that at least it's important one to kind of understand now, because if we talk about embedding cost information in the model and getting the architect and engineer to do it, that's a no-go. They'll never do that. It's like asking the question earlier on, well, who has responsibility? The QS will be saying that, well, the architect put the information in, I'm just using what they've done. If they haven't done it in accordance with the IFC or the BIM execution plan, then, well, that's not my fault. That's their responsibility. So we have to have that clear definition of how we're managing information, I would say. But good question, though, and I like it, Jeff.
No, I actually agree with what you're saying, because as quantity surveyors, we need to do it for ourselves. We can't send it to the fence anymore, and designers don't think like we do. So we do need to input the information very, very early on to get the output. So but I think the way forward will be ultimately a QS model view definition, like you have model view definitions for everything else you need, like planning model view definition. I think that is the way forward, that we get what we need and only what we need, because it's too heavy otherwise. We can't cope with it. Yeah,
so your IFC that we talked about earlier on, that is cut down and slimmed down just to what we need it to be like, rather than having everything there, because otherwise you can't manage it. The information's too much, and it's 90% of it is irrelevant, to be honest, for us. Exactly. Very relevant for the design team or for other stakeholder groups, but yeah.
But the other important thing is, as you agree, is the fact that we don't get all the information for a cost estimation out of it, and the recognition, that you can only get 60%. I think there is not a recognition out there. Everyone thinks you can automate bills and you get automated quantities. They don't recognise that automation is no issue.
You can automate it all right, just go in one building, but the granularity that we like to work in and need to work in the industry, especially for example, the LCA and embodied carbon stuff that we're going to be talking about later, Archie, is we need to work in that granularity now, because we need to be able to calculate both cost and carbon, and you can't do that on one building. You have to get down to the nuts and bolts,
Yes, particularly now since the ICMS is mandated and the carbon counting is mandated, yeah. No, thank you.
There's one more person over there. You want to ask? You've had your hand up from the beginning. You're okay? No, good. All right. Well, listen, I think we could go on probably all day with this. It's a fascinating conversation. Thank you all for your time. Once again, just to say thank you to Dara, Ryan and Ross for excellent presentations. They'll be around for the day. If you have any burning questions to ask them, track them down. Ask your questions, but you'll have to take it outside and go and have a sandwich or whatever you're having for lunch. Thank you very much, everybody.